Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CUBE Pod, episode 91. I'm John Furrier with Dave Vellante. Dave, salute to you again this
Hey,
week.
hey, what do
I
you
just
say,
got off a
brother?
plane from from Boston. We
I
drove
know you were
back.
just here the other day. I mean, come on. I just
Just
saw you yesterday.
just drove back from. We drove. I flew into New York on a one-way ticket. You and I drove back from New York.
That's right.
We were
Yeah.
there meeting with IBM. IBM also held their investor meeting. We were in New York for a couple days, and then drove back to Boston. I just flew back this morning. We had a team meeting. Also, got to see my son Tyler. He lives in Boston. Hung out with my sister. But I love that snowstorm. I love the classic New England snowstorm. Cold, and then it got a little icy. But back in California, where it's actually raining and dumping snow in Lake Tahoe, so it's ski time here. But man, what a week! I'm kind of tired. I don't know where to start. I mean, first of all, there's like so much tech news going on. The IBM this week caught my attention. Their stock hit on Wednesday, 260 something, I think it was, the highest stock price in IBM history since I think 1919 when they went public. So a lot of the IBMers we saw that week in New York were super pumped because they're all making money. And again, this is the highest it's ever been in the history of the company. So, what's going on with IBM? That was the subject of my blog post on SiliconANGLE and Substack. I wrote a post on LinkedIn, just kind of a teaser, just get my thoughts out yesterday. That's going super viral. Just kind of a take because I think the IBM got a gift with DeepSeek because there's a class of companies, and we went into this last week, a class of companies that their entire value proposition of their bet for their AI strategy is kind of confusing. It's hard to squint through. It's a complex story to tell, but a lot of smart people like Arvin over at IBM, Matt Hicks, who's the CEO of Red Hat, which is now part of IBM, companies that are in this position where they have this bet and their strategy that's hard to tell was completely unpacked by DeepSeek. And so DeepSeek had a chat GPT moment. We all know the chat GPT moment. That's your favorite line on the pod. The chat GPT moment heard around the world. That opened up the eyes to the consumer and the world. Like, this is incredible magic. DeepSeek was a software, very nerd version of the same effect, where the DeepSeek moment was, wow, there's innovation that wasn't seen by a lot of other people. And we unpacked that last week. IBM has been doing it. So I wrote a story about that. It's very nuanced, but DeepSeek actually was a benefit to IBM because they were touting their Granite models in their investor meetings with the performance and the cost. And so as cost continues to drive down very, very low and speeds are increasing and performance is increasing, we're in this cycle of innovation, a super cycle as you call it. And so the DeepSeek moment is a enterprise AI moment for people like IBM who don't have the big clouds. I mean, you look at the CapEx reports from Fitzy, who covers all the CapEx, which we can get into because Amazon had their earnings. IBM is not on the CapEx leaderboard because they don't have a lot. They don't have a cloud really that's going to be competing with
Is that a
AWS.
feature or a bug?
Well, I think the DeepSeek moment, as I pointed out in my blog post, shows you that it's the intricacies of the models to working together and the integration. And so I think IBM is essentially brokering an integration layer for their installed base and/or startups and developers who want to code into it. So I think we're seeing kind of a new moment that's going to be a Cambrian explosion of new kinds of developer motions versus the classic old school. Hey, here's a developer environment, build on it, and extract rents from that. Not anymore. I think it's going to be more of a very collaborative, connected integration. So I think DeepSeek has opened up the aperture and kind of turned the lights on to the value proposition of integration. And IBM's been doing this for over a year and a half. And so as a result of their strategies and that, their stock and their business performance is off the charts. So they haven't had an investor meeting since 2021, I think, or 2023.
Yeah, because they didn't have a great story. But I wrote a piece when Arvin took over. You find it on theCUBE Research. It's called IBM's a breaking analysis. IBM's future rests on its innovation agenda. And in there, I'm looking at it now, I had this chart. I wish I could show it. I had a chart, Fortune 500 rankings and IBM's historical market capitalization. So when Gerstner took over, its Fortune 500 rank was, right up there. I can't tell exactly from this chart where it was, but then it plummeted. It was it was in the top 10 when Gerstner and Palmisano were running it. It dropped at the beginning of Ginny's tenure. It was in the low 20s, and when Arvind took over from Ginny, it was like 30 in the 30s. So it kept dropping. It was like 38. So smaller is better. Its market cap. So I remember this well. When the mainframe sort of transition occurred, IBM got crushed. Gerstner came in. He bought PwC, turned it into a services company. You have to remember at the time, many people don't remember, they were going to break up IBM. John Akers wanted to split the company into database, storage, PCs, because that's the way the industry was going. Gerstner said, no effing way. We're going to buy PwC. We're going to be a services company. Remember, he was a customer at Amex, and he's like, no, we want one throat to choke. You can debate, by the way, whether or not that was the right call, but it certainly was at the time. Stock takes off. Market value goes up to just under kind of where it is today. Palmisano takes over, does really well, hands it off to Ginny at a peak market cap of just under where it is today. And then it just destroys it. Goes down to a $109 billion market cap when Arvind takes over. It's now $233 billion market cap. And what we said at the time, I was just sort of parroting his agenda. He said, his commentary was, we have a commitment to company growth. We're going to focus on growing the value of the IBM company. We're going to lead with a more technical approach. And, those three, then he talked about the pillars of the business. And of course, he went on to buy Red Hat. Mm-hmm. And now he's on the way. I mean, I saw, for the commentary from the investor meeting, I saw one of the things in there was a commitment to 5% long-term growth. Would like to see a little bit more than that, but that's, I think conservative. And the plan's working, John. We got to be impressed.
There's a lot of commentary also on LinkedIn around some of these service provider businesses, the system integrators, and their billings are down. And we were having a conversation last week at Dell Technologies founder event with John Rose, the CTO and Chief AI Officer. He pointed out to me that in all his briefings, which is consistent with our research, is that enterprises are fickle, but an enterprise AI opportunity is massive. And he said, and again, you and I have found this out in some of our research, is that enterprises don't mind tweaking and changing some of their processes to get the betterment of AI, but they're very dogmatic and nervous to change tooling and platforms, because those transformation projects can kill a company. So if you're going into an enterprise, and we're seeing startups and developers come into the enterprise and they want to code into these platforms like IBM and Dell, they're installed there, and integrate into their stack, versus bringing in a whole new platform, rip and replace. So there's a really good trend, a signal in the market now that shows visibility into a workflow, into a sales motion, to a technical motion, where you can come in, change process, bring in AI for quick demonstrative benefits. But the minute you start playing with the tooling and the platforms from a change out perspective, that's problematic. And we're seeing deals die there, right on the goal line, so to speak, to use a football analogy. People can't punch it in. And as a result, you're seeing all these companies have 1-year contracts. So in the enterprise where the big money is, everything is right there stalled. It's like a purgatory. It's a proof of concept purgatory. And why I brought up DeepSeek in this IBM article was, it wasn't obvious until I was listening to Matt Hicks talk, who's the CEO of Red Hat, and he said something really interesting in the investor meeting. And this is why I think DeepSeek is a chat GPT moment for the enterprise side of AI. So chat GPT was the moment for the consumer general AI audience, everyone who uses it. DeepSeek is the moment for the enterprise. Matt Hicks said this was not a disruption moment for IBM, and it was actually exciting for them because they see as a benefit. And he said, quote, "Open source is where IBM and Red Hat live." These guys, Red Hat has been from day one an open source company. They know how to commercialize open source in the enterprise. They can take the DeepSeek-like style, the innovation of combining a bunch of open source components and making it work. And they got the hybrid cloud straight. So I think that Matt Hicks is onto something here, because if they can commercialize Linux the way they did and the way they've supported for decades, you can come in and take this new developer build out motion with open source software and algorithms like I call it the Seek style, which IBM is basically doing with their models, and commercialize it. That has not yet been done, and that's you hit the jackpot with that. So I think IBM and Red Hat, specifically what Matt Hicks is talking about, is a huge opportunity. And they already got the hybrid cloud work done. They're partnering with AWS, Salesforce, SAP. So I'll tell you right now, this is actually a really interesting role. And what they become is basically a broker of technologies. I don't want to say system integrator, Dave, but you got some features of software and hardware. So they got the levers. They got the hardware levers and the infrastructure side. Rick Lewis runs that group. And now you got the software, and you got Watson X horizontally across all the groups. So IBM actually has all the levers to make it work. They just don't have the cloud, but Amazon's there. So like, it's really kind of an interesting strategy. And I think, we've always said Arvind Krishna has always been smart. And I think the Red Hat acquisition caught everyone off guard, but this is really interesting. This could be that dark horse for IBM. And again, back to open source, Red Hat and IBM know how to commercialize it. So I'm very bullish on this, because I just don't see any other better path to make open source models
So
work other than what they're doing.
I wanted to comment on some of your comment on, you were talking about John Rose and what's going on in the enterprise. So the difference, so when the cloud came about, it was, people were, organizations, they were doing virtualization. So before VMware hit and virtualization, people were just way over provisioning infrastructure. And then virtualization comes in, and it's like, wow, this is awesome. We can get our server utilization up, and then they did the integration, and storage utilization got better, et cetera, et cetera. But they still had to run their own data center. So when the cloud comes along, and they had all these kind of crap applications running around, and they said, wow, we can move a bunch of this stuff into the cloud. We can lift and shift, and we can get rid of our data centers, and we can spend less on power and cooling and building out new data centers and real estate. And so that was big thing, and CapEx versus OpEx. And so that was beautiful. But when you wanted to modernize your applications during the cloud era, what you generally did is you put it in the cloud. And then that's where all the modernization happened, all the tools and all the great ecosystem and the whole Kubernetes thing, and beautiful. And then eventually the on-prem crowd, took them 10 years, but they finally kind of caught up, and they said, hey, we can do that too. We have less clicks, simplified environment, you can provision. So okay, so they did that, but the business case for bringing things back really wasn't that compelling. It was more like, hey, we got stuff on-prem. It's going to stay on-prem. We're not going to screw with it. If I'm an insurance company, my claims system, I'm going to keep it on-prem. It's my family jewels and things of that nature, those core transaction systems, my Oracle databases, a lot of that stuff, just now starting to move into the cloud, because Oracle's got the same thing going on. But that stuff really hasn't even moved into Amazon, those core mission critical apps. Okay. So a lot of data is still on-prem. What's happening now is much different. With AI, because of data sovereignty, you've got all this data on-prem. I'm not going to move that into the cloud to AIify it. I'm going to AIify whatever's in the cloud. I'm going to do my experiments in the cloud, but I'm going to bring the AI to those applications that are on-prem. So this is a massive opportunity if the on-prem cloud can do more than just, a bunch of hardware. So they've got to build similar ecosystems and fill gaps that exist today. And so you've got startups that are in the cloud in a big way, a lot of AWS, they put their data in there. And so that's where it's like an innovation flywheel going on. And, let's face it, if you're a startup, you're not knocking down the doors of Dell and HPE and even Oracle I would put Oracle in that camp, and Lenovo. You're going to AWS and Microsoft and Google. But companies like Dell have a massive distribution channel and could be very attractive for some of these, startup ecosystems. And there's an opportunity for them to build out a stack on top of their hardware that is compelling, so that customers can to do their AI on-prem. And why do they want to do that? Because, like I say, data sovereignty, the data is there, and the cloud's expensive. I mean, look at Amazon's operating profits. AWS's
Yeah.
operating profits were like 38% last quarter. So, they're making a lot of money. They're charging a lot. And if it's not bursty traffic, if it's not bursty workloads, you can do it for less on-prem. So great opportunity if they move fast.
Yeah, I mean, again, let's get to Amazon earnings in a second because AWS's numbers are in there. I want to comment on that and unpack it deeper, dive on that. But just kind of closing out this DeepSeek IBM thing, it's not just IBM that wins, it's everyone else in open source. And I don't know if you remember in 2023 or 2022, the Google engineer wrote a memo that leaked. It was all over Hacker News. We have no mode, and neither does OpenAI. Remember that? It was a
Yep.
memo that said,
Yep.
we're all screwed. Don't try and stop trying to copy OpenAI. In fact, we debated on theCUBE, you and I, about does OpenAI have a lead with
With
Howie Hsu
Sarjeet,
and others?
remember? With Sarjeet
yeah,
Johal.
Sarjeet, and we talked about this.
The premise was that they won't, that was the breaking analysis, they won't maintain their first mover advantage. You said they will. It still remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, I think OpenAI will always have that first mover advantage on the big models. But I think that same year, I think we were the first ones to ever publish the power law and point out that there's a power law of models coming, meaning there's going to be a big one, has a lot of volume and usage, and then you have a specialty models, and then it goes into a long tail. That's actually
Power law is
happening.
playing out. Power law is definitely playing out.
We definitely got that right, and we were right at the beginning. But so is everybody else. Like, for example, Jim Zemlin in Linux Foundation and everybody else that's in open source all saw this coming. It wasn't like we're just the geniuses. It's open source. Anyone who's been in the software business, even before
We're not
open
the
source-
only geniuses.
Yeah, exactly. The open source community. Remember, our generation is first generation open source. We were pre-open source, which means for the folks that are under the age of 30 or 40, might not even know that there was a world where proprietary software was the only thing. So open source kind of came out of the grassroots of West Coast and East Coast hubs like Northeastern, MIT, and UCLA and Berkeley, UCal, University of California, Cal. And that movement started, right? So again, this is happening almost directly in this same vein with OpenAI and other models. And everyone knows, who's in open source, knows that software always wins. And that memo was a lightning rod because it activated all of us who know open source software and saying, open always wins. And in fact, that whole article was that. So even recently, Sam Altman said that they need to pursue a strategy in open source. So I think the DeepSeek was not only a opening for the AI players, as we pointed out, but it's also a shot across the bow that, hey, proprietary may not win. So if you're a foundation model that's called proprietary, it's proprietary meaning that they own it, will be outflanked by open source. So, everyone kind of knows open source will win in the end. And that's why I like the IBM story, because their entire bet is open source. And they got Red Hat. So they got the people, they got the expertise, and the trend is their friend on this one. So I think, that's what's going on with IBM. And I think they're going to continue to be a high performing stock if that business results keeps coming in. So, I think, we'll keep an eye on that. Again, I think how this plays out in open source, whether it's Linux Foundation or however it gets built out, we'll see. But big impact there. Again, very small news, but again, IBM's stock price in 110, I think 113 year history of being public has never hit this number ever. So
I'll share something with you about open source. My quasi mentor, he certainly was an intellectual mentor at IDC, David Michel, and I've had him on Breaking Analysis a bunch. You've seen his work. In 1995, he gave a talk, and he was the one who put forth first the whole theory of disintegration, and he explained the industry structure. It's all well known now how the industry in the 80s and 90s sort of separated into individual lines of competition in disk drives and database and servers. They all sort of, as opposed to the vertically integrated model at the time, it was very confusing to people. He laid it out beautifully. He said in 1995, remember Windows 95? Microsoft was so powerful. At the peak of Windows 95, he said, I think open source Linux is what's going to moderate Microsoft's power. And I remember using that line on Scott McNeely when I saw like a couple weeks later, and McNeely was like, "Oh my God, you're the first guys I've ever heard say that." I said, "Well, it wasn't me; it was Dave Michelle." He goes, "Well, yep, but I think you're right." Of course, McNeely was like super biased, but it
And he
turned
had the
out,
proprietary operating system too.
but yeah, that's right. But it turned out well, he just hated Microsoft, but it turned out to be correct. And remember, Microsoft went sideways for a decade, and the reason I bring that up is because, the power of open source, everybody kind of recognizes it now. I don't think they really recognized it at the time. I know they didn't. They were concerned about it. Oh, you can't use open source. It's not vetted by the lawyers, but that's all ancient history. So I suspect, my point being, there's a new dynamic now in open source, and there's a spectrum of open, right? You remember Unix used to be synonymous with open systems, right? So now you've got DeepSeek. Well, is DeepSeek open? Well, yeah, I guess so. The MIT open source license. Is Llama open? Well, it's kind of open source, but maybe it's not as open as DeepSeek. It's OpenAI. It's called OpenAI, but it's really closed. And so there's this. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, what's Anthropic going to do? I would think Anthropic's under a lot of pressure. Maybe they open source, portions of Claude. It's just, we saw this with Cloudera and Hortonworks. So it's my point is, it's a never ending ebb and flow of openness, and if you use it correctly, you can really win. If you don't, you might end up like, unfortunately, like Cloudera. They had the running the table on big data, and all of a sudden they had to support all these open source projects, and it was like them dying under the weight of open source.
And the thing too about, you did a data gang with Tony Baer and the folks there. He calls knowledge engineers, like referencing like librarians. This came up on the SiliconANGLE post that was covered by the writers there. The metadata side of this whole piece is going to be interesting. If you look at what's being open sourced, weights, other calculations, the software and the data behind the open AI systems, open mean not open AI, but like open source AI data is going to be huge. So I think, Tony Baer and the team there, and you guys were onto something with this whole knowledge engineer. So if you look at what Cloud Native's been doing, everything's calling it platform engineering. We've been saying data engineering for lack of a better word, but I think this idea of a knowledge engineer, because one of the things that's the key in all these AI stories is that domain expertise, knowledge of experts. These are the buzzwords you hear. This whole knowledge engineering field, I think, is going to be the confluence of data engineering, platform engineering coming together, and the open source developer community is going to really be the ones that got, to me, slingshot the value proposition, because I think the big surge will come quickly once the developers know what they can code into in the enterprise. So on the enterprise side, where the money is, I think that's going, again, another key nuance point. But it's all good. Now, back to reality. There's tons of layoffs. Facebook's going to do a big layoff on Monday, from what I'm hearing. Salesforce, Workday, Hugging Face, Okta, GM Cruise, Sprinkler, Sonos, everyone's laying people off, right? So there's a big layoffs going on. So there's a lot of people hitting the streets, unemployed. At the same time, earnings were somewhat disappointing. I mean, people squeaked through. Amazon squeaked through. Stock was down this morning. But you're
I
seeing,
have thoughts on that, John.
and the DeepSeek too killed the NVIDIA stock when that hit a week ago. So again, this is like we're in a weird time. We had predicted on theCUBE. It didn't come true like we had thought. I said, startups going to fall out of the sky. Maybe they won't be falling out of the sky, but they're descending. But these aren't just startups; they're big companies. And I think if you're not on the right side of history, and I made a clip of one of our highlights in the theCUBE pod saying everyone wins in transition. So you're seeing a lot of people not getting it right, and you're going to start to see evidence through layoffs, business model transformation or pivots. And so you see the winners just thriving. So the IBM, they're not pivoting, they're accelerating. So it's going to be very interesting, Dave, to see how that plays out.
And I think the same is true for the cloud vendors. My title of my breaking analysis this week is "Investors Cool on Cloud as CEOs Double Down." So, are you going to, Sundar and Andy and Satya and Zuck, I mean, they understand well exponential growth. They have some of the smartest people in the world working on these things, and they're spending, like, literally, they're going to spend over $300 billion next year on capex because of AI. And so, my take is that when you have these markets, and it was interesting listening to Microsoft's earnings call, they said that the problem they had in cloud was non-AI execution. And I'm like, that's it. They put in some BS in
That
the
was the
thing.
word they used?
They use some BS term like, oh, this was our scale aspect of the scale execution. I'm like, what the fuck is scale execution? What they meant was our partners didn't have their shit together and they weren't selling the old stuff. They were over rotating to AI because it's so hot. Well, but what does that tell you? And this happens how many times have I said, John, the old stuff is flat to down. The new stuff is hot and it's growing in triple digits, but it's not big enough to offset the decline in the old stuff. And that's exactly what's happening all over the place. And I suspect that's in part why, some of these guys missed slightly. I mean, the misses were so minuscule. I mean, the profitability is awesome. And even Amazon, I think actually, if you take out the FX, they actually hit on my number. I tweeted that out that morning. And so what happens in these new markets, we always, as people always say, we overestimate at the beginning of a wave, we underestimate the steady state, but in between points A and B, it's choppy, it can get ugly, it's really unpredictable. It's hard to say. Sometimes you get a dead cat bounce on the old stuff. You watch, you'll see it when there's a new cycle. And so you got to stay focused on the long term, in my opinion. And so short-term traders, and they can do whatever they want, but I would not be freaking out about the long-term opportunities in cloud and cloud and AI. But I have something I want to run by you. If we can go back to some of the DeepSeek stuff.
Sure.
It comes from Michelle again. So I was asking him his take on all this craziness, and this is going to be near and dear to you. Because he said the closest analogy I can think of is page ranking, which made high quality, inexpensive internet search possible for the first time. I was like, I never really thought of that. I hadn't heard anybody talk about this. He said, assuming DeepSeek's innovations are as real as they seem to be, since the company has no patent control, others are quickly going to figure out how to do the same thing. Okay, he's
right on that one.
That's totally right. Individual AI transaction costs will come way down and be more like Google search. Again, something that you know a lot about. This is great for AI and society, which makes it much more likely that advertising will play a major role or even the dominant role. Free would likely trigger a usage explosion, so overcapacity doesn't seem to be a long-term problem. On the other hand, I suspect the $500 billion that was said to be planned for Stargate will quickly be exposed for the bunk it always seemed to be. And Europe plans to build their own giant centers, may well get rolled back, as they probably should have anyway. This advance came from China isn't the least bit surprising to anyone who's paying attention. It could have also come from India or elsewhere. America doesn't dominate advanced thinking in AI. It dominates in market creation, leadership, and scale. Interesting comments. Whether there'll be a dominant AI content company is, of course, hard to say, but as long-term market leadership will depend on the customer experience, size and scale, and platform capabilities, a few giants seem likely, e.g. iPhone, Android. Odds are the US and China will go their own way within their spheres of influence. As for NVIDIA, the value of having leading-edge chips will go down. I disagree, as there is less need to pay for a premium for peak performance. I disagree, but this could easily be offset by rising volumes as AI proliferates. I agree. So whichever chip maker is in the lead should do just fine. China will do everything it can to use their own chips and will eventually succeed. As for Trump's tariffs, buckle up. I thought that was a really good take.
And the question is, what do I think about that?
It starts with the closest analogy I can think of is page ranking, which is something
I don't think I like that. Well, first of all, I think he's stretching for that. Sounds like he was like looking for it. He said, all I can think of is it's as good. I see where he got that point, but what's different now and then is that Google was basically implementing page rank on the internet, right? So at that time, it was about finding what you're looking for, and they called it algorithmic search, I mean, Google, before they implemented AdWords, which came from, real names, and GoTo.com, the company I worked with and sold my company to, we did it first. I mean, we were the first ones doing it. So Google was just a search result, and their only revenue model was an OEM deal, a licensing deal to Yahoo. They had Google.com, which was growing through word of mouth, but the bulk of their business was a deal with Yahoo and a deal with us at real names, and that was that. What happened was is that and Mary Meeker was the lead analyst at Morgan Stanley at the time. She said, and she always put out a survey every year, the state of the internet online population. So what was going on there was that the internet population of users was growing. People were discovering the World Wide Web and web pages. So web pages became the consumption vehicle for content. Okay. What Google did that was genius with PageRank was they actually got the webmasters and people to tie into their system, and they leveraged the growth of the pages themselves. So, for instance, and they just had a clever algorithm that they rolled up, and once they got critical mass, it was hard to copy. They became inimitable, right? So that's hard. The barriers to entry were significantly hard. All the other search engines went to build these portals, they called them at that time, and the rest was they couldn't pivot fast enough to catch up Google. And then once the revenue model kicked in, they were off to the races. They just had the best search. With AI, it's different because you have different environments with its consumption. Also in the enterprise, it's deployed differently. So I think I like the advantage of looking at it more like iPhone versus Android, right? In terms of like the user experience. But the back ends are complicated. So it's hard to kind of squint through those two power incentives. You have back-end scale, CapEx, front-end user experience. So you got more of a iPhone moment with ChatGPT, and then you have more of a web moment with the back-end with the infrastructure for AI. That's why all the actions on CapEx infrastructure. What I think that DeepSeek represents is the transition from when Intel made memory and everyone was building computers, and they use off-the-shelf components to make a PC. IBM was the first. You had the Homebrew Computer Club. So I think DeepSeek represents, I think, the innovation in systems. Because what they did was, with their constraints of China not getting the GPUs or sneaking it through the hedge fund, whatever they did, they were clever because they had to be clever. They had constraints, and the constraints drove their innovation. It was the same constraints that the PC industry, Steve Jobs and Wozniak did with Apple, was they had to operate within a low footprint physical device as well as chip sizes. So they innovated everything. And everyone who's seen the movies or read the books knows that they had to like really engineer everything, the disk drives, the memory. And so I think that's what DeepSeek represents, is much more of that boom of the computer industry. Because if you remember what happened next, Dave, because you and I were both in it, every year there was always a leapfrog of performance, and you're seeing that now with the models. In fact, I was just reading a story online today on the plane ride here. I think an IBMer and then someone else at Meta kind of wrote a story on this, where it's like another leapfrog's going to happen. And Jim Zemlin just posted something on LinkedIn. I just saw that just now, in this morning, where another model is going to beat DeepSeek. That's why people are calling it DeepSeek-like or DeepSeek style. They're calling it a style of innovation because that's what it was. There was no marvel of engineering. They just engineered what they had with the constraints. That's the marvel. So to me, that means it's going to happen again. So the question is, if it looked like that PC revolution days or the early days, there'll be another integration or configuration of software and hardware to be faster. So I think he's onto something, but I don't think it's a page rank because it's just too different of a consumption and environment that they just did an algorithm on. So I think he's kind of close, but I liken it to the growth of the PC because the movie was the same, right? It's like the big whales had the big systems, mini computers, servers, proprietary. Now open wins, and that was a multiple generation wave.
But here's where I think it was interesting to me, because I've always said you don't know where these innovations are going to come from. During the PC early PC days, everybody thought, oh, IBM, the IBM PC is everything. Well, it turned out to be Intel and Microsoft, and even the hardware, side of things was, there were, many winners besides IBM, but it was really Intel and Microsoft were the big winners. And early on, nobody really figured that out. Eventually, it was very clear. During the internet, it was, oh, Yahoo, AOL, the granddaddy of the internet, Netscape. Well, it ended up being Google. And that's where I think, Google search and the page rank actually got kind of is where the analogy holds. And because DeepSeek is like, I thought like, maybe Perplexity is the one, but yeah, the model, maybe not, maybe not is point about advertising. And then here comes DeepSeek. Now you've got this other China dynamic. My point is that it's really unpredictable when you do these waves where these winners are going to come from. Of course, OpenAI, that was kind of the obvious, favorite out of the box, right? The even money favorite. Just like Netscape was the even money favorite, and then Yahoo kind of became the favorite, and then Google comes out of nowhere. They were probably 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 at one point.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's always great conversation. I mean, I think it's the most exciting time. I think, again, DeepSeek is still in there. I just saw a stat. Someone was mentioning that. I think Amazon had a analyst event and, and some sales events or partner events. And the Bedrock DeepSeek portion was the most attended ever because people want to know. So it's got everyone's attention. I mean, people in my family that aren't in tech heard about it. So I think that's going to be a big thing. And again, I think the the tide shift is causing stocks to drop a little bit. I think the earnings have to do with mostly maybe because of the business models aren't coming in as fast as they had hoped. Like I predicted, I don't think there's going to be an AI bubble pop. I think it's going to be the balloon. Think of a balloon. Instead of popping, so air will come out of it slowly. But I think we're going on a surge with the developer productivity
I
I was
had
pointing out.
I had 5 people this week, friends of mine, not in tech. 5 people said, Dave, have you ever heard of this app called Perplexity? Is it safe?
Yes, it's the best one out
Five.
there.
5 people. I got out
Yeah,
of the blue, totally unrelated. I was like, wow, okay. He's going mainstream.
yeah. I mean,
It's a huge.
I use ChatGPT and Perplexity all the time now. I mean,
Oh yeah, me
more than
too.
Google.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I use Google too.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes it gives you good answers at the top when it's doing an AI. Other
Where's
times
the
it's just
restaurant? Where's the directions?
yeah.
Not
I don't
for
know. I wish they'd
knowledge.
just make it simpler. Google's got to. It's like Michelle has said. The experience. The experience with Google AI sucks. They really got to get that together. And I think they're trying to figure out. Okay, well, we don't want to give too much away. Why buy the cow if the milk's for free,
All right,
sort of
so we have
thing.
a lot of great commentary coming up on the President Trump situation, and he's certainly flooding the zone, as we say, and then also Steve Bannon's been using that term for a few years now. But the chaos. Rob Hove has a story he put up. So we have the hardcore analysis from Rob, and there's evidence. He's backing it up with links. And the chaos is causing everyone to kind of scratch their head. I personally would like to see the government get reformed, but the method of the madness has to be questioned. So, but Rob put out a great post. He used the word the mischief and dubious DOGE coup squad. Okay, continue unabated. Just a lot of actions. Again, everyone's going after Elon and the young kids. They're not an agency, but they were mandated by the president. So I'm cool with them sniffing around and apply technology, get data, no problem. Trump campaign done. I have no problem with that. To me, the phone calls I'm getting and the signal messages I'm getting from people deep in the government, DOD, secret regions that we've worked with in the past, they're all like, the shit's getting real, like, and it's really crazy. So one person said, the Republicans just could keep the frog and just boil the water, and keep the frog in the water and just boil the water, and no, Trump's going to throw the frog in the microwave. Okay, so like it's just such a shock to the system. It almost can be too dangerous. That's my personal opinion, but I like the efforts. That I support the efforts. Now the question is, we have separation of powers for a reason. So the Constitution and separation of powers is super critical guidepost. So I think there definitely needs to be watchdog and or oversight, 100%. I think there's a lot of publicity that they're using, especially with USID. Okay, I can see that one. That's a pinata for today. They're pounding the hell out of that one. But yeah, go in, use AI, use technology, but you got to be 100% transparent. So I think the press has to just get through themselves and get smarter and be faster on the analysis to peel back what's happening, and just kind of just keep an eye on everything. So that's my opinion. I'm not anti Elon as much as, let's say, Kara Swisher is. She's going crazy online about this. So, we'll see.
My only issue is I do think, people run around and say, oh, weaponizing the Justice Department, which, by the way, they did, and I'm very much against that. And they broke the laws, but Trump comes in, he just breaks the law. I mean, my like, for instance, you're supposed to give 30 days notice. Okay, well, it's just a technical law, right? It's technicality. All right, but I think there are laws. My point is this: I'm all for it too, John. So go about it lawfully, so that it doesn't blow up in the courts. Right? Why wouldn't you want a more efficient government? Government is inefficient. They're spending too much money. Brad Gerstner makes, he has good data on this. He says, if you go back to 2019 and look at the spending levels, if we just go back to the 2019 levels, we'll be in great shape. Why can't we do that? Because, it's not like our services and our government is that much better today than it was 2 years ago or 7 years ago, whatever it was. And so I would rather they do it at least within the law so that it doesn't get stuck in the courts, because then government just doesn't work.
First of all, people should check out the muskwatch.com. That's what Rob's referencing in the stories. His story, I think it's a great link. So there is Watch. It's kind of like a Drudge report for Musk. They're kind of keeping someone on it, and it's like the Politico for his actions. It's basically a blog. The problem is that what I was explaining to my kids and and people in my circles is that if the Constitution is at risk, that's all that has to be watched immediately. That's like the high order bit. Like, just don't stay within the law of the Constitution. The problem that I know is a problem is that when you get technology access to these systems, this ain't like putting a thumb drive in a PC. Okay, you see that all over the web. That's cybersecurity risk. That's endpoint protection. This is not what's going on. I mean, you can create a digital twin of a system in very short time. So if you know what you're doing, you can come into these systems, get into the ERP systems, and exfiltrate data quickly into a digital twin, and then do all kinds of AI. Now, that could be super efficient. As we know, we love digital twins as a efficiency piece, but also it's very sneaky. So you got to watch what's being accessed. And again, back to transparency. If you're going to get access to a system, whether it's Department of Treasury or Health and Human Services, Department of Education, some are saying that's next, and that Trump's got more executive orders coming. He's just like an executive order machine. So at some point, maybe there should be, like, not term limits, but executive order limits. Like,
yes,
it's like throwing the flag in football. You can only have 3, and then if you're wrong, you lose a timeout.
But he really has
consequences. You could issue executive orders all day long.
But he really has to do it in his first 100 days, because at some point here, within a year and a half or 2 years, he's going to be a lame duck. So he really doesn't have 4 years to get all this stuff done. He's got really till the midterms, and so. Again, I would just like to see it done, because I think there are always unintended consequences. Our, newest security analyst, Jackie McGuire, points out that, a lot of these executive orders, they're shifting responsibility from one agency to the other, or they're making cuts. And in critical agencies, security is potentially, a blind spot in here. And Elon's approach of delete, and then put it back later. Well, if you're deleting critical, security infrastructure or, tribal knowledge, and something goes wrong, like, oops, okay, that's different than the specs on a Tesla. So, we should have put that back, or we shouldn't have deleted that, or we need that on the rocket, or whatever it is. And so, that to me is a little bit of a concern here. But again, why wouldn't you want more efficient government? I mean, everybody should want that. Everybody should want the government working better. I don't like the fact that Trump is pimping Trump watches. I don't like the fact that he floated a crypto for for him and his wife before he became president? I think that's,
Why are you against that? It's just it's like
well,
a memorial coin.
I guess, yeah, but because he's got a stake in it. That's why. I mean, does the president benefit from if they did an Obama coin during his presidency and everybody bought it, should he get like a bunch of the profits? This guy making billions
I
off of
mean,
that. I
first
just
of all,
think
the
it's a.
Clintons made probably more money than Trump did on
And
their
don't
presidency.
give me the what about. Okay, I'm not here to defend the Clintons either. I'm just saying they're all. Ralph Nader had it right. The similarities are far greater than the differences between. I'm like George Carlin. I don't believe anything a politician says. If it comes out of their mouth, I'm like, what's his or her agenda? So you
I
just
mean,
got to be
I do like that the fact that there's
skeptical
technology people in the government doing work to try to solve a problem, and I think
for sure.
that
Absolutely.
to me is the first time in our history we've had, I won't say seat at the table, like a legitimate access to the machine. And I want to see what comes out of it. I'm
I
very
have no problem
curious.
with that, John. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with billionaires being in there. Billionaires are smart. A lot of them, most of them, many of them are really smart people. So I'm all for that.
Yeah.
No problem with that. I take everything with a grain of salt when it comes out of the government.
All right,
I
Lena
mean,
Khan had a great article this week. I don't know if you saw that,
I couldn't
Dave.
read. I didn't read it. I saw it with the New York Times link. I don't subscribe to the Times, and my free
I will. Okay, I'll give
my
you time to
freebies
read
were
it.
up.
We'll hit
What's
it up
the?
tomorrow, but I thought it was hilarious.
Did you read it? I mean, give me the bottom because I said my free articles had expired, and I don't pay for the New York Times.
Well, it was basically like, it was anti-big tech, obviously. So, I mean, and, we'll get into it next week. You can give you time to read it. So, it was her swan song, I think, for her
Parting shots. Well,
parting
she's just her rewrites history all the time.
I'll give you the 2 cents here. I got to read the headline. The headline is opinion. It's opinion story. Stop worshiping the American tech giants. So she jumped on the DeepSeek.
What's her point there? That this is an example. This justifies her.
No, she's justifying the fact that if we don't go after these big companies, then all the benefits of innovation that wouldn't have come if they had not broken up AT&T and IBM.
So let me see. So we have these big tech companies that are dominating everything, and yet Perplexity, OpenAI, DeepSeek come out of the woodworks. Anthropic. Wait, I thought big tech had a lock on all the innovation. How is it that all these startups became tens of billions of dollars worth tens of billions of dollars of value? She's claiming
that the government's decision to enforce antitrust laws against what is now AT&T, IBM, and Microsoft in the 70s and through the 90s helped create the market conditions that gave rise to Silicon Valley's dynamism and American subsequent technology.
Oh my God. This is what I mean by rewriting history. Let's review yet again. We broke up AT&T. What did it do? It set the U.S. back years, probably a decade in technology, in mobile and wireless technology. It was technology that enabled all the transitions. What happened? We got baby bells who became big, dumb, stupid, slow-moving cable companies, number one. Number two, we lost Bell Labs to Nokia. We had Bell Labs, one of the most innovative labs, that Xerox PARC, et cetera, gone. Okay, that was the result of AT&T. Failed. Okay, great. Microsoft, okay, maybe they had their thumb on Microsoft. What was the outcome of Microsoft? Nothing. All it did is slow Microsoft down from innovating and creating a great cloud. Of course, it was Microsoft's hubris. Steve Ballmer was trying to put Windows on a phone. That was his big idea. It was their own nonsense that hurt Microsoft. It had nothing to do with look at markets will figure this out. It's the companies will almost always shoot themselves in the foot. What was their other one? IBM.
Yeah.
Come on. IBM was so arrogant in the 80s and they couldn't lose. In the 90s, they were hanging on to the mainframe.
I think late 70s, early 80s, IBM was the most arrogant. They got punched in the teeth in middle 80s. Late 80s,
John, 1989, I think it was 89, IBM had like record profitability. In 1989, 1990, 1991,
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, no, I pretty much
I mean, they had the
remember.
no layoff policy up until till George Conrades was the CEO. I think 1990 did their first layoff ever.
Yeah,
IBM had
that's
a
what I'm
no
saying. They
IBM had a
peaked in
no layoff
'89.
policy. Talk about,
So,
talk about the
but
debate around, a good place to work. And this whole DEI thing, I saw something on TV yesterday that said Silicon Valley can't hire credible people because of the DEI and the H-1B visas. And I was like almost punched the TV because it's like Silicon Valley actually is one of the most democratic and meritocracy based systems. But you win big too, right? So when you win big, you can do a lot of big things and hire a lot of people
I
and
mean,
create a culture. Like Hewlett Packard was a company I worked at, both IBM and Hewlett Packard, both great corporate cultures. Some would call them country clubs. Now, that's was benefit to the worker. So just because companies do that today, they confuse that as DEI. That's not DEI. That's just called, rewarding a workplace. Silicon Valley is very meritocracy based. You win. You're in the arena. You die. You put everything on the table. So I was this whole narrative has gone a little bit too far.
but
You know,
look, being big is not against the law. And look at
I
some of
agree.
what Lena Khan does is okay. Like if she were saying, "Look, we don't want oligopolies," but she says things like, "Oh no, we have to foster competition." The tech industry has never been more competitive. Think about the cloud. You have three giant cloud players knocking each other's brains out, spending over $300 billion. We'll throw in Meta, four of them, spending over $300 billion in capex for the benefit of us all to use as services. I mean, it's an amazing gift that they're giving. Google search, GPS. I mean, all these technologies that are essentially come for free, in exchange for to let them appropriate your data and stick ads in your face. I mean, they should be like thanking big tech and aligning with big tech.
That's why I like.
And that's why big tech's excited right now.
I'll say right now that people generally aren't against Elon's efforts. There's people trying to make it personal, but like let's see how that plays out. A couple more weeks. I'm happy to stay with the tension. Um, Dave, just kind of like getting into some of the other stuff that's jumping out at us. We got obviously the earnings piece. You get a breaking analysis about the hit. Next week, we're going to have 3 days of filming here in Palo Alto with the top CMOs in the industry coming in for a CMO leaders event. We got the event season kicking up again. Events are back. I mean, more than ever. I think this year will probably be the busiest year theCUBE has seen, I don't think, since like 2018 in terms of activity. So just a ton of like action. And what's your take on all this? With the overlaying on our previous conversation around earnings. What's your take this year in 2025? I mean, I have an opinion that's going to be a pretty good year for AI workload in production, but what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the investor sentiment, the cooling on the cloud, the big three clouds, is an overreaction. They don't like it when you spend a bunch of dough and you don't get big returns. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on capex, and combined this big CEOs of the big three companies saying, we've got multi-billion-dollar AI businesses, so they're spending 200 billion to get quote unquote multi-billion-dollar AI run rates, and so investors don't like that. But it's like I said before, they see the future and they know. Al Shugart said something to me one time, because remember, Al Shugart is a legend. Nobody seems to remember Al Shugart, but this guy was a legend. He was so good. He was at IBM. He was an engineer at IBM. Everybody went to Al to find out, okay, I'm stuck, and Al would tell them where to go. This guy had such balls. One day when he quit IBM, he literally set up a desk outside of Cottle Road in San Jose and recruited people in to go work across the street at Memorex. And so he invented the floppy disk drive. He started Seagate, and it was a great innovator and great business person, and just an all around good person. He said one time, disk drives, remember, were a highly cyclical business, and so there was always overcapacity and undercapacity. And I asked him about that one time. He said, it's way worse when there's a market out there and you can't meet it. And so it always stuck with me that that's the way, CEOs with vision think. And these guys they do not want to be left out in the cold when, the AI wave hits, and it's hitting. And so they want to be there. And if they're not ready to take advantage of this, and you got to get on that curve. And so my take is, we are seeing the slow, steady rise of adoption. I mean, the adoption's off the charts, but in terms of the overall shift in spend, it takes a long time for what I was saying earlier. The new stuff is not big enough to offset the old stuff, and the new stuff's rise is not big enough to set off the decline in the old stuff. And that creates dislocations in the market. And I think we are entering one of those dislocation, confusing phases. Combine that with tariffs and interest rates and, DOGE and everything else, creates a lot of uncertainty. And as Rob Hof says, businesses don't like uncertainty. So, but you got to stay the course. I mean, if you believe that this is real, which I do, then you just have to identify your first principles and stick to them.
Yeah, and I just got a note from a friend on LinkedIn who was telling me that he saw that we're going to be opening up our second studio this month in New York Stock Exchange on February 20th. So he wanted to come down and check it out. I was talking to Brian Bauman, the founder of NYSE Wired. He also works for ICE and NYSE capital market side, but everyone knows Brian Bauman. He knows everybody. He and I were talking, and I didn't realize that 7 of the top 10 IPOs in 2024 were on the NYSE, and 9 of the 10 top performing, or 17 billion raised was 9 of the top 10 performing IPOs in 2024 were on NYSE. NYSE is getting their mojo back, and we're going to be holding an event on the 20th. So check that out. If you're in New York, February 20th, and then Dave, we're going to Life Callings having a big event on the 21st. Notes to Humanity. John Mack is heading that up. And so we're going to have a lot going on. Now, speaking of IPOs, do you think in your breaking analysis and your predictions that we'll have a strong IPO window this year, given what the earnings just came out? I mean, I think you always have these cyclical things going on. What is your take? I think from a product-led triggering standpoint, I think you're going to see developers kick value in. My personal opinion is wave 1 of Gen AI was the ChatGPT moment, the hype, the experimentation. This is cool, like the web. And then phase 2 last year was a lot of RAG search implementations, and then POC purgatory. So everything's kind of stopped. I think this year you're going to start to see things like what IBM's doing and others, where you're starting to see people figure out this DeepSeek like style with the developer productivity coming over the top. I think you're going to see a breakthrough. So I think that will propel stocks. So that's my take. What's your take on this year's IPO market?
My take on IPOs is I think the first half you're going to see either companies who need the money go out, or companies that are in private equity who are dying to get liquid because their LPs are like pounding them. So like, for instance, SailPoint, which is going out, I think Thoma Bravo, right? And so there's a strong desire to get liquid, and they can. I think that's going to be the first half. I think those that don't need the cash, like Databricks, I put Veeam in that camp, I put Sneak in that camp, and obviously there's others, are going to wait and see because of all this uncertainty. They don't know where interest rates are going. They don't know where the economy is going. They don't know what the impact of Trump is going to be. And so I think they're just kind of waiting to see, that they've got clear indications. And so they might go out in the second half, or they'll wait until 2026. And if they're cash flow positive.
I think Trump's a wild card factor. I think he's, to your point last week on the CUBE pod, you mentioned that he always loves to tell people we're winning, and stock market's a huge thing for him. He actually was the last president since Ronald Reagan to actually go to the New York Stock Exchange ever. So presidents don't just come by. He loves the stock exchange. He thinks that's the symbol of money, and it is, by the way. So he loves to be there. If the stocks plummet under his watch, I mean, I know he's not going to get another term, but that will bother him. So I think he's going to have this in his head that if he starts doing crazy stuff, the market will react, and that could be one thing that I would be careful of. Now, the other thing that counters against that is just the movement of the market. I saw news from Julie Choi, friend of theCUBE. She's the CMO at Cerebras, formerly with Mosaic ML, worked with Naveen Rao, who's now running Databricks' AI piece. They run theCUBE. Julie's over at Cerebras. Cerebras has this super chip, power chip. It's a monster chip. I call it the God chip. It's like super fast. It's the big chips. And that kind of fits into the whole DeepSeek kind of innovation. They already have DeepSeek R1 running, but they just put news out with Mistral today. Cerebras, Mistral is a French company, so they call it Le Chat, Le Chat Web,
Le chat,
L-E-H,
le
Le
chat.
Chat, Le Chat. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Yeah, Le Chat app responds to user questions at 1,000 words per second, making it the fastest AI assistant. So why am I pointing this out? One, I like Cerebras. One, two, speed wins, right? So if we are in this super cycle where it's a lot like the PC revolution, Cerebras of the world will force the market, and then there'll be the haves and the have-nots, and the haves will be the ones that are on the right side of history, and the ones have-nots are the ones on the wrong side. The wrong side is trying to rip and replace, change platforms, change out tools, not focus on the data and the process and the experts. So I think you're going to start to see very clear lines of sight into success. Right now, it's like the fog is out there and it's lifting. I think you're going to see evidence, and I think Cerebras is one of them. I love what IBM's doing. Always love AWS. I think they're going to thrive no matter what the environment is. It's just too big to fail, and I don't think they will fail. I think they got a great team. And Microsoft, I mean, they're too big to fail too. I mean, they're going to continue to take rents down. So, and then Google has got great AI too, but they're still behind. Now they have to catch up. So I think, Dave, that could propel the IPO markets if the developers, if the systems that are being deployed with these big GPUs and the DeepSeek like styles actually have software to run on them, right? I
I,
mean, at
I
the end of the
do,
day,
I do think that somebody said it. I forget who. It's like this market is like it might have been Bezos. This market is like the tech companies, like a coiled spring ready to explode. There's like 1,200 IPOs. They can't wait. They're like busting at the door to get in. And so I do think that once there's clarity, and I also do think it's probably likely going to happen before the midterms because it's not inconceivable that
yeah.
the Trump's madness causes another shift because half the country hates him, and then the Democrats take over the Senate or the House, one or the other, and then everything comes to a grinding halt, which screws up the economy again. And so it's very possible these IPOs will happen, before the midterm.
To kind of wrap up my view on the whole Trump thing, the comment that was shared with me about the frog in boiling water, we all know that, if you're a frog in boiling water and you're in the water, you don't know you're being boiled until it's over, versus putting the frog in, then it jumps
That's how
out
I
when it's
cook
too hot.
lobsters.
And the comment was just so right on. I mean, the Democrats lost, the Republicans won. They're going to come into Washington. They have the mandate. The frog's in boiling water. All they got to do is turn the heat up, and then they can do their thing. Instead, Trump takes the frog and puts it in the microwave and puts high heat. He doesn't have. I mean, it's just a wild card, right? So that kind of encapsulates the loose cannonness of what could happen. So hope for the best, plan for the worst. On the tech side, I think we're just in a great movement now where smart people, the human in the loop, is going to leverage the technology to build better businesses. I think you're going to see an era of new kinds of competitive strategy, new kinds of financial models. We had that CFO summit. So I think an opportunity on the human side is to actually tap the intellectual capital of people. And I think that's going to be something to watch in 2025, is to say, how do people are thinking about their business? Are they just doing the old things with AI? Are they actually rethinking the processes, using their existing tools? We're going to see winners just turn on the brain power. And I think that's going to be a game changer. So you got the politics and you got the business transformation happening. So those are two powerful dynamics, if applied properly, could be super great. Or if one crashes, I mean, that's the opportunity. I mean, Dave, follow the data. The data doesn't lie.
Yeah, we always say that, the old term from Watergate, follow the money. We always have said, follow the data. That's so we did. We did with the big data back in 2010 when theCUBE started, right? I'll never forget when you called me. That's SNIA or storage networking world or something. You said we're doing Hadoop World. Come to New York. I'm like, yeah, but I got all these meetings in Dallas. He goes, well, and you said like, what, with a bunch of storage people? Come on, you got to get to New York. And
I got to
flew in
tell you,
an ice storm.
I'll tell you a funny stat because you mentioned Hadoop 15 years ago when we started SiliconANGLE theCUBE. All my traffic on LinkedIn, they have little stats about where it comes from. For the first time in my LinkedIn history, post was higher in New York over Silicon Bay Area in terms of number of people. So I think the New York thing is getting a lot more people are getting to see the action. And the numbers are doubled, so it's great. So it's growth on the numbers, but it's more New York. So the New York Silicon Valley thing, Dave, I think with tech in DC, tech is mainstream. So I think it's going to be a good year for us and everyone in the industry. So I'm looking forward to it. So, all
Yeah, me
right.
too.
Well, have a great weekend. Final
All right,
question
John.
for you is who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl?
I think Mahomes is going to win the Super Bowl, and
No,
almost
the
single-handedly.
Eagles.
I think,
Eagles.
I think Kansas City's defense is actually really good. I think, I think it's going to be hard for Philadelphia to get a multi-touchdown or a two score lead, and I think as a result, Kansas City three-peats. And
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know who I'm rooting for.
Remember the chip on the shoulder. The Eagles were knocking on the door 2 years ago.
You
So I
know, and
mean,
they're good. They're a good team. No
eh,
question about it. And I even generally don't like teams from Philly, like the 76ers and the Celtics, big rivalry. And, was never a fan. But I had Jalen Hurts in my fantasy 2 years ago, and he did well for me. I've always liked Saquon Barkley. So I think I'm going to find myself rooting
Dave,
for the Eagles because
2023.
I don't want them to beat, the Patriots record and Brady's record, the
Dave,
Kansas City, that is.
this rematch from 23. Remember, I was in with Paul Martino at his bankroll thing that kind of went out of business. But they had greased the poles in Philly because they were playing KC. KC won it, scoring 17 points or something in the fourth quarter. They won 38-35 on just a last minute, it's just a shocker.
I remember.
So,
It was an awesome game.
I think the Eagles were going to come out of this and they're going to just win from the opening snap. That's my prediction.
Well, they better because if
Yeah.
it's a close game, you got to give the edge to Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean Mahomes. I think he's going to get
And
pounded.
by the way, and Andy Reid. I mean,
Well, it
that
depends if
guy.
depends if the ref's going to be stuffing the flag in their pants because if they call the penalties they called on the Chiefs, I know the Bills could have won the game. Many people are saying they could have won the last game, but there's definitely the people chirping hard that the refs, Mahomes flops big time. I mean, you look
I got to
at
take on that though. I got to take on
what's your
that.
take on that? Yeah.
So here's my take on that. Like all this analysis, you hear all this analysis before the Super Bowls and everything else. And of course, with the Patriots in the Super Bowls for all those years, you paid really close attention. You listened to all the sports radios, you read all the articles. All of that goes out the window Super Bowl Sunday. It's so unpredictable. It's right. Once that game starts after the first quarter, it's a freak show. And the refs generally don't want to be influencing the game and all the game planning and the strategies, forget about it. It's a wild west for 3.5 quarters.
Well, also at the big stage, some people do choke, right? So if the Eagles don't
Yeah.
choke, I think they'll win. Again, if Barkley runs hard and does his thing, and the line, they got a good O line. So
Remember
you know,
Welker, right? Remember Welker in the Super Bowl against the Giants, and I loved Welker, but he dropped that pass. It was right in his hands, right on fourth down or third down. I can't remember exactly the play. And then Eli got the ball back, and the Giants won. Welker choked, and he was so good, right? So you're right. Big stage.
all right, Dave, have a great weekend.
Yeah,
I'm going
enjoy
to
the
rest
game.
up for the Power Days CMO leader event, and also enjoy the game. Thanks for listening, everyone. Of course, if you got anything, hit us on DM. We got a lot of comments last week on the Stargate and the DeepSeek stuff, Dave. So people love those commentaries. So thank
All
you,
right.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.